Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day and welcome once again. Before we start, just want to say thank you for your continued patience. Sorry, it just astonishes me how many people were begging me to make this video sooner. And to be honest, I'm at a loss as to why that is. Don't get me wrong, Season 7 comfortably fits in the classic era of the show, but I don't think I've ever come across a person who would rank this series as their all-time favourite. I have good memories of watching the 7th series alongside its predecessor on CITV, and there are a lot of episodes I love on here, but as I've grown older, the more I've reached the conclusion that while this is a good series, it's only the 7th best of the classic era. I don't want to call it the worst, it's just there are a lot of hints of what was to come for the show, and episodes that really don't belong in what should be the best era for Thomas. Anyway, let's go through all these, rank them, and explain why they deserve 3 cheers, or why they failed to get it right. As always, remember that this list is based on my opinion and no one else's. Your list will probably be different to mine, and if so, I'd love to see it. Anyway, let's begin. Number 26. Well, of course it's the Old Bridge. On to number 25. Oh, am I supposed to talk about why this one sucks? Why should I? There is nothing that people have said in the past that I don't agree with. The plot is lazy, and Scarlowy's behaviour is an absolute disgrace. The fact he put his own safety before his brother's meant the Scarlowy we knew and loved has died. From here, he is childish, fearful, and miserable. If this was the only episode where Scarlowy behaves like this, I probably wouldn't be as angry at this episode. But actually, it's the first of far too many. The Old Bridge was one of the worst of all time. Now let's forget about it and move on to some slightly better ones. Number 25. Salty Stormy Tale. I thought Salty was perfect. I thought they would never have him as the main character in an episode as poor as this. And yet, here we are. To be fair, the reason I don't like this episode isn't entirely to do with Salty. It's good old Thomas and Percy. Just like the Old Bridge, this is an episode that begins running out the worst of the characters we loved. Thomas and Percy making fun of Salty is not only mean, but really poorly written. And also the fact that it actually upsets Salty is something I find really out of character. The only time Salty shows any emotion other than cheerfulness is last series when he's not working at the place he loves. It makes no sense for something like this to bring him down. The scene where the lighthouse is being fixed is actually quite intense, and I wish the whole episode was focused on this, but it wasn't to be. Instead, it teaches lessons we'd already learned in previous episodes. Definitely a downgrade. Number 24. The Runaway Elephant. Okay, I have heard that this one is pretty popular, but for me it's another rock and roll, another Passengers and Polish, another Duncan. There is nothing new here. Duncan is definitely in my top 5 favourite narrow gauge characters despite not having that much competition, but his earlier episodes always have him learn basically the same lesson, and by now it's boring. Another big loser in this one is the fact that the runaway scene is basically the same as Reneus in the roller coaster, except in that one it feels more realistic. Even without a brake van, there is no way an elephant statue can make an engine lose control like that. It makes no sense. Fortunately, in a few series' time, people finally said, let's do something different with Duncan, and I'm really glad they did, because The Runaway Elephant is an instantly forgettable episode. Number 23. Not So Hasty Puddings. In the DVD release, this is the last episode of Series 7, but I'm glad that's not the official placing for it, because this one does not feel like a good ending to the classic era. Okay, there is one thing I like about this one, and it definitely isn't a small thing. I like how it wraps up the rivalry between Thomas and Elizabeth. I'm not a massive fan of the vintage Laurie, but it feels very fitting for her to need help for a change and Thomas being her rescuer. However, the dialogue is the big letdown, and this is the case for a lot of episodes this series. The fact that they argue about being reliable doesn't feel right, considering what made them fall out in the first place. Also, you couldn't go through one snow episode without reminding us of Thomas's hatred of his snowplow. We don't care. However, they made the crash feel realistic, and that's always a winner in my eyes. Number 22. Fergus breaks the rules. You decided to write a song about Fergus running away instead of a song about Henry or Edward. You should be ashamed of yourself. Okay, I do have fond memories of this episode, but the thing that I find most inconsistent is the fact that Fergus believes Diesel's lies. What? Fergus only has 2 episodes where he is the main character, and in the other one, he's smart, he's sensible, and he's brave. Here, it's the exact opposite. If this one actually aired a considerable amount of time before the other episode, I probably wouldn't have as much of a problem, but apparently not. The dark atmosphere is the thing I like the most, and that's why I don't hate this one. However, the odd change of character and strange episode title makes it fall down the list. Number 21, The Refreshment Lady's Tea Shop. Okay, that's all the episodes I slightly dislike out of the way. The next few will be ones that are just fine in my eyes. This one is my least favourite because it's a really straightforward one. The Refreshment Lady's looking for a new tea shop and with Peter Sam's help finds one. That's pretty much it. My one complaint is the montage of Peter Sam showing all the sights, which costs us a bit of screen time. Considering we're in a series where the narrator gauges very rarely use their heads, it's strange seeing Peter Sam come up with a good idea when he finds the old carriage. However, that's the bit I like the most. If you like the sights of the narrow gauge, you probably will like this one, but maybe not if you want a unique, memorable story. Number 20, Edward's Brass Band. Same as before, this is another of those straightforward episodes. Edward wants to take the brass band, and at first it seems he can't, but later he does. The end. I don't really buy Edward getting so upset that he can't do the job. He would be down about it if he was acting normally, but not depressed by it. The way the accident happens is weird as well. We can tell that Edward saw the boiler swinging in his direction, so why didn't he just stop? That's a question we often have to ask in Thomas nowadays, isn't it? That's pretty much it. They did a good job with the post-rain shower sets. That's one thing I liked. Other than that, a really forgettable episode. Number 19, Toby's Windmill. This one, again, is just mediocre. The scene with the storm is quite short, but still very well filmed, especially when the windmill is struck by lightning. This is another of those depressed and miserable Toby episodes which I'm not the biggest fan of, and it's no different here. If it was the version of Toby I know we all love, we know he wouldn't burst into tears, which pretty much happens here. He would try to find a solution straight away. He is a grown-up, let's not forget. Anyway, we're pleased when the windmill is rebuilt, even though we haven't had much chance to feel sorry for the miller, because we've barely got to know the guy. But there's one thing that they could have done that would have made this episode more emotionally relevant. Instead of having it as a random windmill on Toby's branch line, why not do it with the windmill in the opening credits? The thing that we've seen in working order in every single episode so far, damaged beyond repair. We would hate to see that, and it's such a huge part of the show. Had they done something like that, Toby's windmill would be even higher than 19th place. In my view, at least. Number 18, Bill, Ben and Fergus. I know I said I didn't like Fergus's change of character in his other episode, but that doesn't mean I like the other version of him that much. Pairing him up, or grouping him up with Bill and Ben was a really good idea. However, that potential wasn't really fulfilled in the way I wanted. Sure, it's quite amusing to see the twins being put in their place by this new engine, but my goodness, why did they have to make it so annoying? This is the reason I despise Billy. The dialogue in this episode makes Noddy sound like Shakespeare. Even the end line is incredibly cheesy. However, when Fergus dived in to save the twins from the falling stones, that was the moment Fergus became a favourite of mine. Except it wasn't, because we don't see him as brave as this again. This was the version of Fergus I wish we'd seen more of. The fact that he risked his own life for two edges who had treated him very badly almost made me forgive Fergus for all the times he was an unlikable character. But that just wasn't possible. Bill, Ben and Fergus is the best Fergus episode, but that still doesn't make it a good one. Number 17, Trusty Rusty. They should probably make a DVD of all the Duncan is wrong, Rusty is right episodes, because we've got a lot of those. At this point, it's not that interesting anymore. But the thing that makes this episode better than the simple ones I've just mentioned is the tension. Everyone and their mother knows that Rusty will save Duncan in time, but still, it's hard not to get on the edge of your seat. The bridge does collapse, and it looks really dramatic as well. That's really the only great thing about this episode. Duncan is an idiot, as is his driver, and this is another example of why I don't really like Rusty either. I don't know, it's hard to like a character that has no flaws and is pretty much always right. Number 16, Harold and the Flying Horse. We've seen Harold have an accident for the first time last series, now let's see him take centre stage in a different way, and this is pretty good. You don't see him do much of course, but for good reason, and you do feel sorry for him that he's not doing the thing that he loves. I always chuckled when Percy saw Pegasus being carried after saying horses can't fly earlier on. I'm glad they returned to that. Also, Pegasus was my house at secondary school, so of course I'm going to like this one that little bit more. Anyway, it's good to see more emotion from Harold, and the bizarre situation really makes it stick out more. Number 15, the grand opening. This one slips down my list for the same reason James and the Red Balloon was my least favourite from last series, and that's the montage of the balloon flying, which takes out a lot of the story. One thing I will give Season 7 is how much of Sodor it decides to show, and how much the sets have improved and developed since Thomas started. In this one, if you like to look at Sodor with no drama or conflict, you can sit back and enjoy this one. However, story is always important, and this one is quite poor. Topham and Lady House are funny, and the balloon crush is really memorable, but the story of Scarlo being told off for being late is the easiest route to go for an episode like this. I rate this one higher than Harold's episode because of the way it concludes, which does feel really pleasant. Number 14. What's the matter with Henry? Every opinion-based video I make has to have at least one unusual choice. I'm sorry if you're against controversial opinions. Yes, Thomas and Percy are being mean to my favourite character. Yes, this started the trend of Henry being ill all the time. But I understand what they're trying to say. Would you believe me if I said I'd recently gone through a spell of depression? Exactly. You wouldn't have guessed, would you? That's because sadly in today's society, illnesses and mental health problems are being kept secret, and some people just don't have the confidence to talk about them. Granted, Henry's issue isn't mental health related, but he doesn't actually tell anyone about what's wrong with him until Emily finds him and he finally feels comfortable talking about it. When it's all out in the open, Thomas and Percy do feel remorse for their behaviour, and that feels so similar to people who feel bad when a person they know has taken their own life. I would have behaved differently if I'd known what he was going through. Stuff like that. Henry literally says, "You just don't care," something mentally unwell people often believe to be true. I'm probably the only person who looks at this episode in that way because of how I can relate to it, but watch it again with what I said in mind. I'll finish talking about this mostly despised episode by saying, talking to someone about what you're going through makes such a big difference. I did that, I spoke to the right people, and I'm still here because of them. Don't filter feelings, people. Talk. But also, if someone comes to you asking for help, listen. Number 13. 3 cheers for Thomas. Do you ever get one of those episodes where you first think you dislike it until you remember all the good parts of it and you change your mind? Well, that's the case for this episode. I'm not the biggest fan of Thomas or Bertie as individual characters, but their first episode together I always remember fondly. 3 Cheers for Thomas is pretty much that same story, but with a nice modern spin on it, with newer music and locations. If Thomas and Bertie was made for the first time in 2003, this is what it would look like, I think. The sports day is a nice addition, and I like how Thomas agrees to help collect the medal straight away. If this was a CGI or a late model series episode, Thomas would have probably been more interested in doing the race than his job, before learning his lesson at the end. This is the version of Thomas's character I like, the more grown up, more loyal, more dedicated version. For the last episode of the classic era, this was a good way to end it. Number 12. Runaway and the roller coaster. Okay, since I didn't have many compliments for the runaway elephants, I don't think I should put this one any higher than 12. This one is still incredibly unrealistic, but it's entertaining. If you love Thomas the Jet Engine, you probably like this one as well. I know it's just camera angles that make it look like the track's going at weird angles, but it does look a lot like a roller coaster. I'm glad they made that extra effort. The first half is a bit slow, so the runaway sequence isn't as long as I prefer it to be, and I guess the main reason I like this one and not Duncan's is I simply saw it first and not Duncan's until I was a bit older. Either way, this one's really enjoyable in the second half, and considering Series 7 is a bit slow at times, it's good to see things go at a faster pace for this one. Number 11. Bad Day at Castle Loch. See, not every episode about the Scottish twins has to involve them falling out. Unless you discount the short monster argument, that is. The aspect of this one that I think is the best is the intensity. Although this is one of those, "Ha, we got you, there's no such thing as ghost scenes," it still feels spooky, especially with the music and the twins' panicking voices. Am I right in saying the locations here are exclusive to this episode? Because they're really good. And from what I've seen of the country, it does look and feel like you're in Scotland. The landslide is a memorable crash as well, and I think if there's one thing I would change, it's the title. Why is it called Bad Day at Castle Loch when all the stuff related to the monster happens at night? Anyway, this is a good episode that really suits our two characters, and I think would work if there was a DVD of all the stories that focused on spooky things. Number 10. The Spotless Record. The thing that makes most people tune into this one is the runaway scene and crash. I agree with those people. I especially like how tragic they make the scene where Arthur's spotless run has ended, and you do genuinely feel sorry for the guy, which makes this a really good introduction to the character. But now we get to the part that makes this episode fall down the list. Thomas's behaviour. There is no reason for Thomas to want to ruin Arthur's spotless record, so why does he give Arthur false instructions? It makes 0 sense. If you had taken this out and just had Arthur have his issues with the trucks and his crash, this episode would be top 5 easily. This one was spotless until Thomas decided to get involved. A bit like Arthur's record. How ironic. Number 9. Bulgy rides again. I wouldn't call this one overrated, I just don't find it as good as people have said it is. I don't think we necessarily needed a second Bulgy episode, but we got one, and it's a pretty decent one at that. Bringing Bulgy back into the show and back into service only for the chickens to ruin everything does really work with his character, and the scene where the chickens panic and fly all over the bus is very amusing. Heading into this episode, I don't think you'd be necessarily rooting for Bulgy to return to work, but you can tell he's learned his lesson and isn't obsessed with stealing passengers anymore. By the end, you're glad he's got a decent job and a happy ending. A good way to end the Scarlet Deceiver's story. Oh wait. Number 8. James and the Queen of Sodor. Even though he deserves a break every now and then, this is one of those first episodes where James is the laughing stock of the story, and this is a great way to begin that little trend. Gordon also gets his treatment on occasion, so I like that he's the one who plays the trick on James and gets the last laugh. Seeing James almost get dirty so many times is really funny, and even though it's only a matter of time before he finally does, when it happens we still laugh just as much. If it weren't for how much effort they put into the humour of this episode, it would be nowhere near 8th on this list. Number 7. Percy gets it right. I don't know about Percy, but the episode certainly got it right. Even though Thomas doesn't always do the same, Percy has always remained loyal to his best friend, and I guess that's why they've kept them as such close mates for so long. This is the kind of plot that we see in a lot of kids' shows nowadays, but if you push that fact to one side, this one's still really enjoyable. The effects for the wet weather look really good, as does the landslide and the build up to it. James and Gordon calling Percy names is probably the only moments I didn't like, but it's only a short moment. Also, it's a bit of a shame that the Fat Controller says they should listen to Percy more from now on, and really, they don't. Oh well. Percy Gets It Right is another thumbs up episode, and just misses out on the top tier for this list. Number 6. Peace and Quiet. Finally, a character who got a decent introductory episode. Even though there's no explanation for why Murdoch dislikes noise, it's still a pretty interesting character trait, and I like how it's resolved. Salty and Harvey are pretty random characters to be mixed with Murdoch. I mean, I won't call Harvey a loudmouth, would you? Anyway, this episode makes Murdoch a pretty memorable character, and even though he never really had a chance of being as popular as Salty and Emily, he's still well liked in the fandom, so the episode did pretty much achieve its goal. Number 5. Something Fishy. This is the episode that made me decide that Arthur is indeed a good character. Now that his spotless record is no more, the writers decide to give Arthur something new, and that is his love of fish. The first few scenes are the only weak parts of the episode where for some reason the writers think we've forgotten that Thomas hates fish. We know, guys, we watched the show. But then we get to the good stuff. Thomas's crash into the lake is really funny and memorable, and for some reason I always laugh when the trucks deliver their line. Maybe it's because of the great delivery, I don't know. Anyway, Arthur finally gets his dream job, you feel happy for him, and even though we only see him work there in one future episode, it still gives the character another little detail that the kids will remember him for. So, good job, Something Fishy. Number 4. Emily's New Coaches. This one was among the first episodes of this season, so naturally I remember it very fondly. Emily is definitely this series' biggest new arrival, and her first episode is brilliant. When she unintentionally steals Annie and Clarabelle and gets dirty look from the other engines, you do feel sorry for the girl, and of course you cheer for her when she saves Oliver, which is definitely the most memorable scene of the episode, with how close it all gets to disaster. In the end, it's great to see Thomas make up with Emily and begin their friendship, even though we don't see much of that nowadays. Emily's New Coaches ticks a lot of boxes. Memorable new character? Check. Memorable moment? Check. Good setup for future episodes? Check. Number 3. Best Dressed Engine. No one talks about this episode enough, and that really annoys me. Gordon is lucky enough to have 2 episodes this series, and they are both very, very good. Best Dressed Engine is, well, what could I say? Perfect for the character. All the engines are in a fashion competition, but someone is against the idea. I mean, doesn't that plot just have Gordon written all over it? It's really funny when Gordon gets the banner stuck on him, we get another brilliant runaway sequence, and people think he's in the competition. This one is just so season 7. But in this case, it's a good thing. Number 2. Gordon and Spencer. Oh, you thought Best Dressed Engine was perfect for Gordon. Nah. This one is the definitive Gordon episode, because the big engine finally gets something he always needed. A rival, and a brilliant one at that. The second thing that makes this one so good is the fact that it's only the beginning of this massive rivalry between Gordon and Spencer that gets more entertaining every year. If this had been their only episode together, I wouldn't have considered this a top 3 episode. I like the message of the story as well. It's pretty much saying, hey, you might be the fastest engine in the world, but you need logic as well. Definitely one of Gordon's best episodes. And number 1, Snow Engine. In the past 16 years, how many episodes has Toad had as the main character? 3. How many episodes has Oliver had as the main character? The answer is the same as the number of times I've kissed a girl. 0. Either way, if this turns out to be Oliver's last centre stage episode, I wouldn't be disappointed. Snow Engine is fantastic. As ever, the snow looks as pretty and real as you can get in every shot. The story is good as well. For a highly strong character like Oliver, it makes sense for him not to be a fan of snow, and the way his mind is changed is so pleasant. The crash is one that a lot of people remember, and with good reason. I love the ending as well, and what Oliver learns. Snow can be bothersome to a lot of people, but to others it's a wonderful sight. Snow Engine is flawless. Not on the same levels as episodes like The Flying Kipper or Grand Puff. It's not a 10 out of 10 episode, it's a solid 9. And in an era where Thomas and Friends is undergoing massive changes, it must be a pretty damn good story. Out of all my ranking videos so far, I've probably done the most amount of ranting in this episode, but I do not dislike this series for that reason. Every great season has a bad episode, every bad season has a great one. There is a large number of stories in this one that I'm not a big fan of, but you can never skip Series 7. It belongs to the classic era of the show, no arguments. In my view, it's 7th heaven, not 7th hell. And with all that said and done, what do you guys think? What's your favourite and least favourite Season 7 episode? Or better still, can you make a full worst to best list as well? Drop me a comment down below. And now for the question I'm sure you're all typing on your keyboard right now. Am I going to carry on with Season 8? No. While there are a few good or mediocre episodes from that season, I don't really feel like sitting down, going through all again and trying to pick favourites and least favourites. But fear not, I'm not going to stop doing these ranking videos altogether. I would like to try and do this for other shows from my childhood, and maybe a few later Thomas series that I'd actually enjoy going through. Oh, go on then. Thanks for watching, and until next time, cheerio. Here's to the next 250 videos.